This was certainly before the boom of streaming. Nobody knew what
Right.
the word. I mean, the stream was a thing with water, and so and anthologies were all but impossible due to the financing, and they just weren't selling. And so the series was conceived as a cast, and so Eric Stoltz was the editor of a modern love column at a Gotham newspaper, and he had quirky parents, and every episode, a third of the story was going to be a modern love kind of story. Luckily for me, it didn't get picked up. And when I got out and started Storied Media Group, it was one of the first things that I wanted to go out and sell.
Hi, this is Roopak and you're listening to Flux Navigators. I'm a producer and media entrepreneur and founder of Mumbai LA production company Bang Bang. I'm also a diplobrat, or the kid of a diplomat, and that's one of the main reasons I've had the unique opportunity to live in 13 cities in 10 countries on 6 continents. It's a major part of my identity, you could say. So I've grown up with the deep-seated belief that the world is a very small place, and I have the strong desire to make everyone else internalize that too. It's also the reason I'm somewhat of a chameleon when it comes to my English. My accent unconsciously switches depending on whom I'm talking to. Sometimes that freaks people out, but that's how it's always been since I was a little kid. But enough about me, let's move on to the show. Since that fateful day at CES 2016 when Netflix announced it was going live in 130 new countries in one shot, we've been living in a new content paradigm, one where audiences around the world are watching content created around the world. En masse. It's what I like to call the decentralization of Hollywood. Join me on Flux Navigators as I shoot the shit with creators, writers, showrunners, producers, directors, investors, media executives, and other key voices shaping this new global reality. Welcome to Flux Navigators. What's up, everybody? People of the world, welcome to this episode of Flux Navigators. I have with me Todd Hoffman, who is the founder of Storied Media Group. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Real pleasure. So we have perfect start because as soon as I start talking, I can hear a siren outside my window, which I'm sure you and the audience can. I'm in Bombay, as I often am. You're in LA and you're home in, where do you live?
I live in Santa Monica.
You live in Santa Monica, perhaps my favorite part of Los Angeles. So you and I have been in the same physical space one time. We had a great meeting. We were introduced by our common friend, Baba. And I was completely fascinated by your model. And so I thought you'd be the perfect guest to talk a lot about what we talk about, which is the decentralization of Hollywood, because you are definitely playing a part in that. But before we get into that, I'd love to know, what are you obsessing over right now?
My daughter's bat mitzvah, which is this coming Saturday.
Oh, wow. That's monumental.
And just got done talking to the DJ. We got 120 people, 60 kids, 60 adults. So I'm obsessing about that. Beyond that, it's a self-serving answer. I'm obsessing over my company right now because it seems like we're really on the precipice of breaking through. We're doing really, really well. So I'm a bit obsessive about that right now.
Oh, thanks. That's an awesome answer. And I'd love to, obviously we're going to dive a lot more into that. To know where you are. But before we get to, talking about the company, I'd love to know a little bit more and tell our audience a little bit more about how you got here. So are you from LA?
No, I'm originally from Washington, D.C.
Is that Virginia or Maryland?
Actually, just right in the center in Northwest D.C.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Went to school there and then, went to college at Brown up in Providence, Rhode Island.
It's cool.
I acted a bit as a kid and eventually just realized that I wasn't good enough to be a professional actor, but I really liked being around it, around shows, whether that was plays or movies or television. And after a couple of years after college doing management consulting, which I realized I was not good at and found boring, I applied to USC Film School in the producing track and I got in. And I was working in London at the time, and I moved to Los Angeles from London and did 2 years. I got my master's at USC, and From there, it was get out and try and learn everything you can about producing. I went out and just started out on my own, just trying to produce. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I stayed out. I would have meetings during the day and then go deliver food at night for $80 or $100 a night just to keep the bills paid, and just hope to God that I didn't deliver food to somebody I just had a meeting with. And eventually I took a job in development with a producer so I could learn the rules from the inside, and that really helped. And then after a few years, I left and started producing independently. And I got a deal with John Davis, who's a producer at Fox, and managed to put together 6 indie movies in 3 years, all between $1 and $4 million. I got good at piecing financing together. And this was in the 90s when you could pre-sell little movies.
Yeah.
And did a pilot, a TV pilot. Out of the blue, I got a call from a medium-sized agency at the time called Broder, Webb, Chervin, Silberman, and they wanted me to come and run their indie finance group. And I was at a crossroads, and it was either continue on my, I wouldn't say stagnant, but it wasn't like an accelerated producing career, or go into an agency and kind of produce inside the agency. And I thought that would be an interesting turn and hopefully put legs on my career. So I did it. And I had a great, ultimately a 13-year run as an agent. Our agency was bought 6 years into my tenure, and we were absorbed into ICM, and our management went in to run it. So it was a wonderful way to transition to a bigger agency. And while I was right at the tail end of my tenure at Broder, long story short, I signed the New York Times as a client. And I found a story and packaged it with Tom Cruise and sold it for a bunch of money and said, you guys need an agent.
What was that project?
It was a story called The Fall of the Warrior King. And it was an amazing story. I knew a client of mine wanted to write a story about the Iraq War.
Right.
And I found this in the magazine, and I didn't know the first thing about IP. And I tracked down the war reporter who's gone on to be famous, Dexter Filkins, and who wrote the Forever War. And he said, sure, you can go and sell it. So my writer came up with a pitch. We attached Tom Cruise, and right before we were about to go sell it to Paramount, he said, actually, I'm not sure I own this. And I freaked out. And he said, but call this guy at the New York Times. And I called this person, and he said, sure, yeah, go and try and sell it. And I did. And at the time, the Times had a horrible reputation in Hollywood. They had no strategy. Nobody knew what they were doing. And so I found an opening and went to them and pitched them to have us represent them. And after a couple of meetings, it worked. And that actually led to the signing of a second client, 60 Minutes, which led to the signing of a third client, The Atlantic, and then McClatchy newspapers. And out of the blue, all of a sudden I had all these publishing clients. And it wasn't, my original intention, but I got good at finding interesting stories and putting them together.
Sorry to interrupt. What year are we talking around here? When did you sign the New York Times?
2006.
Okay. So this is before their big digital push.
Yes.
Yeah, just a little bit before, yeah.
In fact, when I signed the New York Times in 2005 or 6, I was walking through their newsroom with them, and I walked past a picnic table, and I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Oh, that's our online desk."
Okay, got it.
So, yeah. I mean, it was a long time. We would go to lunch and they would say, we hear one day you'll be able to read your newspaper on a flat screen, and you can hold on to it and it will be thin. And I couldn't even conceive of what an iPad eventually would look like. So, yeah, those were early days in digital. So eventually I was promoted to run the media rights group at ICM. So I was working with the book department in New York, selling books to the marketplace, and also using my publishing clients to package and sell stories and true life stories. And that's the circuitous path in the agency. In 2013, after 13 years of being an agent, I realized I didn't want to die an agent because that just seemed depressing. But I also was getting frustrated with the way big agencies work when it came to IP. Everything was about packaging. So any good story or book, instead of like going out into the marketplace and finding the right way to put it together, I'd be forced to put it together with the clients of the agency. And that was only like 5% of the talent pool in Hollywood. And so I thought that there might be a better mousetrap to put together by being agnostic. And so that we can, agency agnostic, that is, so that we can put together the projects without any agendas or encumbrances and, put them together the way they're best put together. And so, my clients all came with me, and out of that, Storied Media Group was born.
What year was that?
2013.
Right, you said. I'm wondering, in terms of the landscape, and when you started, did you already, what happened in year one?
Year one was tricky. Right before I started, I blew out a disc in my neck and had 2 surgeries, cervical spine surgeries, and was really grounded for 3 months. And that was the beginning of my independent career. So that kind of took me out through the end of that year. And when I started, it was really me and an assistant. I had a partner financing my group. I was on a 3-year deal with him. So I had money to sustain myself and hire an assistant, which was great. But I was really starting from scratch and trying to prove my model. And at this point, this is way before StoryScout was hatched. But I had, an assistant, 3 readers who were helping me curate every day, and we would scour. And I was essentially doing what I was doing at the agency, although I did have producing opportunities because I wasn't an agent anymore.
Right.
And so that allowed me to have some flexibility. I could sell things or I could develop them. If nothing sold and I was really passionate about a story and didn't want it to die, I could develop it. And my clients were all too happy. And so it was an interesting time. A couple of things happened, though, that made me think that I might be onto something. The first year, I got a few calls from TV studios, different studios, and they said, "Do you have any articles about so and so? We just heard an original pitch that we love and we want to buy, but we want to find an article to marry it to, just to have as source material." And I said, "Well, if you love the pitch, just buy the pitch. You don't need an article. It's not based on it anyway." And they said, "Yeah, I know, but it's just so much easier to sell upstairs if we say it's based on something." And a big light bulb went off in my head. And I realized that if they're, calling me to get articles that they're not going to use, that perhaps they would actually call to get articles that they could use.
Yeah.
And that really that was the start of it all. And we started, curating articles, and we threw the links into a database, a FileMaker database, just so that we wouldn't lose the stories. And that was the beginning. It was a good year.
That's fascinating. So you're saying that literally it was the reverse engineering strategy in a way. And, we think as producers, obviously IP rules, and we know that because of the millions of times you hear it every week from everyone you talk to. But and obviously the reason for that is because, I guess, at some level, sometimes is the genuine path to kind of, okay, there's this great article, let's use it and turn it into something. But when you're reverse engineering, it's really cover your ass, right? And it's us as producers obviously thinking that we're going to sell it, but then the executive who's buying has to cover their ass in general because, hey, you know what? I know maybe, this didn't work out, but why did you commission it? Because it was based on underlying IP. Obviously it would work out, right? So yeah,
right.
It's
and it might have had an audience if it was a a popular book, you could say, listen, it wasn't me. It was based on a book that a ton of people read.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, the nice thing about IP is that generally speaking, if it's one offer, you can get it very inexpensively. You don't have to pay $500,000 to buy an article. And it's a relatively inexpensive way to lure in talent. And, if you're sitting in a room with a high profile writer and you say, we own this article, would you like to adapt it? That's a lot better than saying, we read this thing, you should read it, and we want to rip it off. We rip it off for us. Because, as you know, ideas aren't copyrightable. So you could take anything and just, adapt it however you see fit. But it's, when you own something, you're really planting a flag, and you can scare away competition as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, just to break it down for our audience, you've got Storied Media Group, which has under it, you're producing as well. There's TV, there's series, there's features, and even in that, there's scripted and unscripted. And then you've got your product, StoryScout, right? So when did StoryScout come about? What was the thinking behind creating that product? How do you differentiate it? And how do you structure the organization? Obviously, you sit on top of it, but who does what? How does your team function? How many people are there? Tell us a little bit about that.
So StoryScout originally was conceived about, the beginning was about 5 years ago. And as I continued to accumulate these really great stories, we eventually came up with meta tags for them that could help describe what they were. We started tagging them by geography and character and relationships. And whenever I'd meet with a producer, we'd have this clipboard with the sheet, and we'd say, can you check what you're interested in? Because we can, keep that on file and we can send it to you. And for the most part, they all said, well, I'm interested in anything good. I don't want to just say, quirky comedy. As the business continued to expand, because at that point I was representing about probably 15 publishers now, mostly domestic, but some overseas. We signed The Guardian, we signed the Smithsonian, signed McClatchy, signed NPR, and some others. I realized that we were sitting on all these great stories, and I thought, what if we could somehow turn this database into a product? And so I started talking to people in Hollywood and just listening to their frustrations, the various frustrations with the buying and selling of IP. And they all were fairly consistent. And I thought, God, I think there might be a way that I could help solve the problems that are inherent in the buying and selling of IP through technology. And then I asked people, what if we could, have this product that, so that that would essentially democratize IP flow. So it would push instead of their need to pull out of the agencies and maybe get it, maybe not. Mm-hmm. And everybody said overwhelmingly, yes, build it. So I raised some private equity, sold a piece of the company to a German distributor.
Can you say who the German distributor is?
It was Telemunchen.
Okay.
And they invested in the company. They've since sold to a big German, actually KKR.
Oh.
They put together they rolled up 4 companies, and they're now the biggest distributor in Germany. It's a group called Leonine.
Oh yeah.
So they're one of our investors, and so KKR has my shares. So they invested. They really liked my vision for what became StoryScout, and they gave me enough money to build it. And so I worked with a group, and we designed it, and the alpha version was really wonderful. Yeah. And then the beta version, that when we went out was really, really powerful too.
Amazing. Sorry, just coming back to that. So are they investors in the company or specifically in StoryScout? Is that a separate entity or just a product?
They are investors in Storied Media Group,
Okay, got it.
and
Yeah,
StoryScout is a wholly owned product of Storied Media Group.
got it. Got
And
it.
you mentioned producing, and we have, I've been very fortunate to produce a couple of movies. We produced the Clint Eastwood movie, The Mule, and an indie movie, and we've had 5 shows on the air and multiple unscripted shows as well. We even won an Emmy last year
For what?
for best live special. We worked with the Washington Post and shot the SpaceX launch live for NASA and SpaceX and for Discovery, and
Wow.
broke viewing records, and won an Emmy. Crazy.
Amazing. Amazing. And yeah, that'll break records for sure. What are the scripted shows that you have? I know one of them.
That was The Oath. That was based on a true story for Crackle that ran a couple of seasons. We had a show on Fox. It was based on a New York Times article called APB. And literally, we sold the article, and 8 months later, we were shooting the pilot in Chicago. It was extraordinary. Len Weissman directed that. And that ran a season, 13 episodes. I produced a show called Insatiable for Netflix, which ran 2 seasons and was in season 1 was one of the top 10 shows of the year. Let's see, the 4th, I had a pilot that got picked up, never actually went to series, but it was picked up, so I'm counting it, called Heistin for Amazon. And now I produce a show called Modern Love, based on the New York Times column. And we've done 2 seasons, and we're just about ready to get greenlit for season 3. But what's really fun and fascinating is that Amazon has now formatted it, and we're making Modern Love in local languages around the world. In fact, we have 3 different productions in 3 languages in India.
What? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard about a remake in India, but I didn't know there were 3 different. Wow. Okay, I can guess they've probably done like a Telugu and a Tamil one. I would assume,
Sounds right.
apart from Hindi.
So we've got 3 there. Japan is in the can, Brazil, Spain, and I'm missing one other. But what was, some of the data we got was that it really it over-indexed in season 1, not only in Brazil but also Japan. And if you know anything about those 2 cultures, they couldn't be more diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
Which was great because, love cuts through everything, and it is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And so we produced that.
But and sorry, just coming back to the show, I'd love to know how that came about.
Sure.
Yeah, was that conceptualized internally, or how did you guys?
Yes. So when I was at ICM, Modern Love is a Sunday, a series of essays that's run for 15 years, and it appears every Sunday in the style section. And they're written by outside writers who write anything about love, friendship, romantic love, sibling love, really father-son, whatever. And it's just a beloved column. When I was at ICM, I ended up selling it to a producer who set it up at HBO, and they put it into Turnaround. They sold it to Lifetime, and they actually made a pilot, which was just god-awful, and starring Eric Stoltz, of all people, at Lifetime. And this was certainly before the boom of streaming. Nobody knew what the word. I mean, a stream was a thing with water, and so anthologies were all but impossible due to the financing, and they just weren't selling. And so the series was conceived as a cast, and so Eric Stoltz was the editor of a Modern Love column at a Gotham newspaper, and he had quirky parents, and every episode, a third of the story was going to be a Modern Love kind of story. Luckily for me, it didn't get picked up. And when I got out and started Storied Media Group, it was one of the first things that I wanted to go out and sell. And I was in the middle of marketing it, and I had a deal with one studio, and the head of Amazon said, "Don't do it. Just do it all with us. We don't even need that studio. We love this." And so I put it at Amazon. And in that case, I was able to also produce it with the New York Times blessing. And then we started to try and find the right voice to helm the show. And I'd always been a John Carney fan, didn't know him, but fell in love with a lot of other people when I saw Once, his first film. And I called his agent and I pitched the show, and he said, "Well, I've repped him for 10 years. He never says yes to anything, but I'll try." And lo and behold, he called back 2 weeks later and said, I don't get it. I've never been able to have him say, to express interest in anything, but he loves this column and wants to meet you." And he's been my partner for 5 years on the show.
Amazing.
And he's done an amazing job. He's become a good friend, and is really a great steward for the show.
Wow, that's a great story. Yeah, I love it.
Sometimes it actually works the old-fashioned way. You call an agent and ask for a writer, and you get them.
It does. It does. Tell me a little bit about more recent times with Storied Media Group in terms of how is the product shaped up? What's been the difference over, and I always like to say to people that, look, more has changed in the, what is it now, 7 months since LA opened for business on this June 16th than in the 2 years before that, and more changes in the 2 years before that than in the 5 years preceding, right? So in all this time of change and flux, hence Flux Navigators, what's been the evolution, and how has that impacted positively or even negatively in some cases? Hopefully not too negatively at all.
It's a great question. The tectonic shifts were happening. I mean, they continue to happen in Hollywood, but they were happening slowly. And I think the pandemic really just served as an accelerator in all aspects of life. And so I think, relationships sped up, they got better or worse, and more marriage and more divorce, and companies changed and accelerated, and industries changed. It's had unique and I think overall positive effects on our business. Just to define it, so what we ended up doing was we set out to disrupt the way IP was bought and sold in Hollywood, and we did it through this product which we call StoryScout. And StoryScout, for lack of a better description, is a high-end curated Amazon for movie and TV ideas. And it has allowed us to democratize IP flow. So people that are interested in IP don't have to worry about the nuances and the games that agents play, and worry about what's behind the black curtain that they're pulling the strings in, because they can actually choose and activate the projects that they want because they're empowered. And that's what we built, and it's evolved in the 4 years since we went into beta. So that's the system, and that's the product. We're in year 4 of it now, and we had 0% churn last year, and we have 5 studios that are already signed up for it. Sony TV has been a client, and they've renewed. They're on their 3rd year. E1's a client, New Line's a client. We just started working with Warner Brothers Television, and since January 3rd, they've bought 13 projects.
Whoa.
We thought 18 from Sony in 2 years was a lot. When we onboard a studio, we also work with all of their first look and overall deals.
Okay.
So, for example, Sony has, I think, 53 deals. Every one of them we onboard onto StoryScout and give them opportunities to look for the IP that hopefully they want and can sell to the mothership, to Sony. So that's basically what the product is, and it's certainly evolved. We rolled out version 2 about 5 months ago, and we've I think we've perfected the product, and it really works well. Since in the last year, we've also pulled back from being producers in scripted TV and film. We realized that it was a little unclear about what our definition was. What are we? Are we producers, or are we doing this this SaaS business? And we cleaned it up, and instead of producing and being attached to things, we decided to take a step back and let the producers produce, and we serve just as the IP consultant.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm loving it so far. Thanks for tuning into part 1 of my conversation with Todd Hoffman. And we'll catch the rest of it on the other side on part 2. We ripped it off from his podcast, which is, if there was a message, you have a billboard and you can put one message out to the world, what is that message?
Man, you ask good questions. I don't care if you ripped it off from Tim Ferriss. I heard something, actually my trainer told me this last year, and it's really true, and I've embraced it. Nothing changes if nothing changes. I think I would put that on a billboard, and it resonates for me on multiple levels. There are times when I get stuck. There are times when I find myself resistant or even scared of change. And there are times when I fall back into my old ways that sometimes have even to be proven to be incorrect or inactive. Sometimes you just got to get off your ass and just take a step forward. And if you're scared, walk through that fear and try to change things.